So in a recent video, I shared my opinion on Lume, and it wasn't the most favorable opinion of Lume, and some people were freaking out in the comments, and it got me thinking, I probably have some other hot takes that people aren't gonna be a fan of, so I wanted to write those down and share them in a video like this. So we're gonna be looking at 7 hot takes that I have around watch collecting in this video. Now, obviously, because watches are an opinion-oriented game, these are going to be my opinions. You might not agree with them, and if you don't agree with them, leave some comments down below. Do you agree with what I'm saying? Do you not agree? And then also, is there a hot take that you have around watch collecting? Share it down below. So this first one here, I'm actually very passionate about this idea, and it's that sapphire crystals are not inherently better than other crystals, and that it shouldn't always dominate as being the only choice that we should think about when thinking about crystal combinations with watches. I think sapphires make a lot of sense for many people out there, and most of my watches do have sapphire crystals. But to say that sapphire is always superior and there's no reasons why you would own another crystal type, I think is a ludicrous idea. And I don't think enough people are honest about why you might go for a sapphire and why it might not be as superior as some other crystals out there given certain circumstances. Now, a few things I will mention. Sapphire on a more affordable scale oftentimes can feel cheaper than a plexiglass. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but sapphire really relies on coating treatments to be able to provide a nice view of a dial. Also, sapphire crystals are way more susceptible to smudging. If you have any grease or grime on your hands, or you're sweating throughout the day and you just rub your crystal, you're gonna have that thing smudged beyond belief. Nobody likes looking at a laptop screen with all these fingerprints on it. Same thing can happen to your crystal with sapphire. Sapphire also does have more of a cold look, and if the coating is not very good on the crystal, it's actually hard to see, and reflections can be even more gnarly than some other crystal types out there. I also am a huge fan of the vintage hue of a plexiglass or a hezolite. I'm wearing a hezolite Speedmaster, and I put it on just because of this video, because I want to really match what I'm saying here. I decided to go for the hezolite version for my own personal collection. There's a variety of reasons for that, but I do think that that crystal is not thought about enough. It has a completely different look compared to the sapphire, and this is an instance where the sapphire anti-reflective coating treatment on many of Omega's watches is very good. I think many times why watches under $1,000 don't look their price, or maybe look their price, I should say, is because of the treatment on the crystals itself. You're also going to have to mention sapphire crystals are going to be more susceptible to shattering if it does have to withstand a drop or a fall from a certain height. Looking at plexiglass crystals, this is not going to be as much of the case, while also being able to buff out scratches on plexiglass crystals. Just get some polywatch and you're all good to go. If it's a deep cut, yes, you do have some issues, but I actually don't mind scratches as much on my crystals. And on a plexiglass crystal, I'm actually sometimes a fan of it because it adds character, but I'm one of those crazy people. And one final point I'll mention about sapphire as well is just because it's scratch resistant doesn't mean it's scratch resistant to everything. There are different levels of hardness that you have to be aware of. Now, these are just some of the points, and I think we always just put down any other crystal outside of sapphire, which I think is very a simplistic way of looking at it. There's a variety of reasons why you might look at a crystal. It's not a cost-saving measure always. It actually does create a different end result of the watch itself. So some of you might not even know this, but we're releasing daily articles from our written content team, in-depth articles looking at watches that are new releases from Tudor, Oris, Omega, Swatch, Blancpain, Zenith. These are all just articles that we've done recently. In addition, complete guides to the Tudor FXD, the Seiko 5 GMT. We also have industry breakdowns. For example, how Panerai helped pioneer Lume again, the most expensive watches at auction that came from Rolex over the years, and also having hands-on written content around the IWC Ingenieur, the Rolex Explorer, and a lot more. So if this sounds interesting, check out some articles down below. You might also see some familiar faces around the industry. We had Danny Milton, who recently joined our team. Mark Bernardo has been writing in the industry for over 20 years and even has a book on the subject of pilot watches, so an absolute authority. We also have Blake Bettner, who's also joined us as a contributing writer. So we have a lot of content going out. So if you want even more written content to take a read every single day, check it out. It'll be in the description down below, and get lost in some of the other articles that we have on the site. Now for my second hot take, I think Lume is one of the most overrated features of a watch. I actually was confronted in an airport about the subject of Lume, and thankfully the person was very nice. His name was Chris. So Chris, if you're watching, thank you very much for saying that you agreed with me on Lume. Now, some of you might not agree with me on Lume. And now here's my take. Lume is not something that is going to be a deal breaker for me to have on a watch. So many people will go so into detail about how something is going to illuminate, and I am not someone that's gonna fascinate and get so hyper fixated on this subject. I don't need my watches to tell me the time in the dark. Quite frankly, I barely need my watches to tell me the time in general. I usually look at my phone, and that's a point that I'm gonna bring up throughout this video. Watches to me are an element of self-expression. It's not something that I am looking for utility, and I'm not gonna be doing any Navy SEAL missions anytime soon where I'm gonna need to see the light in very murky underwater environments, as an example. Watches nowadays are not tools that I personally need for my day-to-day life. I wear them for other reasons, and Lume is one of these high points of utility that people bring up all the time, so therefore I do not need Lume. If Lume is there, it's nice to have, but sometimes I prefer to not even have Lume in general. I am not going to have an issue falling asleep at night because my watch doesn't have Lume or that it doesn't shine to the degree that I want it to. And also, if I did want it, I actually find tritium is actually more useful for this because it doesn't need to be charged. But in general, I don't think Lume is a big deal. I understand there's certain types of watches like dive watches where it's not authentic. And if you're somebody that also does things with your watches and needs these type of features, totally get it. But for me, not necessary. I think Lume is overrated personally, in my opinion. Point number 3, and this is one that I'm also very passionate about, and I'm just gonna say it. Accuracy is not that important for me when it comes to a watch. And that might sound like an oxymoron. Accuracy and watches go hand in hand. What the hell are you talking about, Teddy? I think accuracy just needs to be adequate, and it's all about expectations when it comes to accuracy. If it's talking about an entry-level Seiko or a Miyota caliber where the range of accepted accuracy is -20 to +40 seconds a day, I can't get upset if my watch is off 30 seconds a day in perfect timing. That's not an issue for me, but I think many people, they get caught up in the idea of a watch. A watch is made for telling time. So if the watch is not telling time to the degree that I set up in my brain, then I am disappointed. But you have to have the right expectation for accuracy. And for myself, I don't really check my watch for the perfect exact to the second time. As long as it's within a minute and I have to maybe check the time every few days and make sure I'm maybe adjusting the hand to ensure that we're getting the right time, I'm okay with that. I like to be on time with things, but if it's coming down to 15 to 20 seconds and that's just absolutely tearing up my day, that's where I check my phone if I'm looking for the precise time. A watch is a reference point to me. Again, I wear watches for their style, the romantic connection, the mechanical mastery of them, and also just being this antithesis to this disposable world that we live in. Products that are made to last in a world and sea of products that are so disposable and can be thrown away after 1 or 2 uses. Those are reasons why I love watches and how they can transcend us. Accuracy is not one of those points. I also don't care about hacking either. I don't need to be sitting here for a minute waiting for the second hand to get right at 12 o'clock, and then I'm waiting for my clock to then atomic clock reference time to be able to match that perfectly. I don't have time for that. Most people I don't think have time for that, and I really don't care. If you disagree with this, that is all fine, but I'm also very passionate about this because of just the expectations I think people have with what a watch should be in terms of accuracy versus what is actually going to be the quoted accuracy from the manufacturer. There's a disconnect here for many people that collect. Now, this next hot take is looking at exhibition casebacks. I think collectively, many brands have decided that an exhibition caseback is always superior to a closed caseback. And I don't think that is the case, especially when you're looking at the under $5,000 segment. This came to me when someone asked me, hey, what can I do if I want to engrave a watch or a caseback? And the question wasn't even about where do you go to get this engraving done? That's a lot easier. The real challenge is, what watch can you even get engraved nowadays? And is this something that's just been lost because of brands wanting to show their movements on the inside? Like, for me, I'd rather have a clean, closed caseback than having a view of a Miyota caliber. And I understand this is coming from somebody that's been desensitized to seeing movement after movement over years, so nothing is going to excite me when I see an ETA 2824 like I did when I saw it for the first time. That said, I think we've lost the ability to customize our watches because of exhibition casebacks. And I think further, there's also some other difficulties that come with exhibition casebacks. Many times it can add to the thickness. It can also get in the way of achieving water resistance rating. If you did have a closed caseback, it's just other seals that you have to worry about if you have to have a see-through crystal on the back of the watch. This really came to me though when I was thinking about brands that do clean casebacks. And the only ones I could really think of from a mass market standpoint that do it consistently are Tudor, Nomos, and Rolex. Outside of that, I really struggled to think about watches, and especially under $5,000, it seems like brands either have a decorated caseback or an exhibition caseback. Some of my favorite looking backs of watches are closed case backs. Think of the Silver Snoopy 50th anniversary, or even something like the Omega Constellation, those vintage constellations with having that cool medallion on the back. The Longines flagship is another example of this. I think that's pretty clean, and I actually sometimes like the look of those more than I would seeing the movement on the inside. Now, my fifth hot take is not exactly one phrase. It's not the cleanest thing to say, but it's around on-the-fly adjustment. A couple of things I want to share about an on-the-fly adjustment. One is it's not always better than the old solution. Sometimes on-the-fly adjustment can actually get in the way of the comfort of the watch, and I think it's more of a nice to have than a need to have for myself. So let's just unpack all of those hot takes around on-the-fly adjustment. So I agree that I would prefer, if it's integrated nicely, on-the-fly adjustment is better than not having on-the-fly adjustment. But one thing that I think has happened is some brands have gone for on-the-fly functionality without thinking about how a watch might wear on your wrist. Like one example is the T-Fit system is phenomenal. It's one of the best on-the-fly adjustment systems that you have in watchmaking. But you look at the 39mm Pelagos and you look at the clasp, because of how much flexibility there is now in that clasp to get the perfect fit, it actually has gotten in the way of it being maybe a bit more comfortable. Now, it's not a deal breaker by any means, and I think it still is a great system, but the clasp is now 47mm in length. That might be overkill for what you actually need. I also think there are instances where I would just prefer to have the holes in the clasp than having some on-the-fly system. If it's not this buttoned up, great execution, sometimes it's not worth it. I'll reference some of the Mito Ocean Stars. I think it's a good attempt, but it's not as crisp as you're seeing from some other brands out there. It's more of just an access to relief throughout the day than having a permanent micro adjustment system. And sometimes I would just prefer to have holes in the clasp where I can just adjust with my spring bar tool accordingly. And sometimes I think the issue too is it's maybe not giving you enough flexibility. I find at least 5 to 8mm of adjustment is a good sweet spot where you can start to get into a size that's going to equal that of a link. So you have at least a link of adjustment. In the Speedmaster clasp that I have here, it's a little bit less than a link, and sometimes I'm just itching to want to have a bit more flexibility than what is being presented by the clasp. And in general, I find a lot of like butterfly clasps very easy and like seamless when they like wear to the wrist. It looks very elegant. And to incorporate on the fly sometimes adds clunkiness and maybe gets in the way. Sometimes I think brands forget about the other challenges that come with using this on the fly adjustment system and how there could be other issues that will arise if you incorporate it maybe not in the perfect way. My next hot take is I think we're a little bit too hard on date window positions. I think people freak out and there's no collective idea around what people are going to prefer. And I just get so annoyed sometimes with some people are complaining about a 3 o'clock date and that being off. Some are complaining about a 6 o'clock date. It just doesn't seem like we can ever come to a consensus around date windows. And in my opinion, I think date windows are usually never a deal breaker for me on whether or not I want to get a watch or I don't want to get a watch. Some people, it is absolutely, they detest a design because of any lack of symmetry on the dial, and it just throws them off. Cyclops gets so much hate. I don't really care that much, to be honest. I don't need always perfect symmetry on a watch dial. I also like a 6 o'clock date. Some people don't like it, and I think that if you want symmetry, that's what you want. But then there's other people that like the 3 o'clock, but then they don't like that. It just goes back and forth, and I feel like we can never find peace around date windows. I'm calling for peace, I'm calling for treaties, I'm calling for how can we collectively come up with a consensus on date windows, and are we able to overlook the fact that dates do have some utility? I think brands, if anything, it might just be great if they can offer just more no dates and date options for watches so everybody can be happy. But date windows, I think we're a little bit too hard on them. I've never really been that turned off by a date window. The only time that I get bugged by a date window is where you can tell that the movement maybe wasn't the right choice for the watch that they ultimately decided on. But when you're dealing with third-party calibers, you don't have that much flexibility. And then for the final point here, it's around chronographs. And I'm wearing a chronograph right now, and I understand what I'm saying, but chronographs are not always the most useful way of timing certain events or things. Now, the chronograph is a stopwatch. That is what the core of the design is and why it was created in the first place. But I find that chronographs oftentimes come with other considerations, and they really are more for design why I'm drawn to chronographs more than any function whatsoever. I also find that a bezel on a dive watch oftentimes is easier and a simpler way to integrate telling time and telling elapsed time, or even a countdown timer on something like a Zen 104 as an example, and other watches out there. Chronographs also can sometimes create different issues that come along with being able to have an integrated stopwatch feature with the movement rather than a bezel. Sometimes that'll mean a thicker case. It's more complicated to service. And they're going to be more expensive than a bezel with timing different events. Now, I do understand that there might be circumstances where somebody might want to time something where elapsed seconds is going to be useful rather than just minutes. For most things though that I'm trying to time, I can probably cover it with a dive watch while also probably having my phone close by where it's going to do an even better job at it. I buy a chronograph mostly for the design and a lot of these other points that I was talking about, the romantic connection to watch collecting more than any utility. But all right, guys, those are 7 hot takes I have around watch collecting. I probably could come up with even more. These are just 7. I don't know if you guys could handle more than 7 hot takes. I know people are already, frantically typing things out in the comments, probably disagreeing with me. So leave those comments down below. What is your hottest take when it comes to watch collecting, similar to what I've listed out here? Love to see it down there. Also, if you enjoyed this video and you maybe want a part 2 of this series, let me know. Give this video a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe as well. That's a great indicator that you want to see more content like this. I sometimes shy away from really sharing some of my opinions when it comes to my philosophy to watch collecting at times, because I understand everybody has their own opinions. But if you guys want to hear me vent more and talk like this in the future, give me some encouragement. Also, be sure to check out teddybaldessar.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. Also, how we're able to fund all of our productions here is through selling watches. So if you are in the market for a watch, we'd love to have your business. We know you can buy a watch in a lot of different places nowadays, but it allows us to keep doing what we're doing here, and we love what we do. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.